I referenced this verse a couple of weeks ago, Proverbs 18:24, which says, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." That's the verse, and I talked about that. Some translations of the Bible say it says, bad friends do this, but a good friend does this. But others, like this one that we just read from the NIV, says there is a friend who sticks closer, and that is implying Jesus. Jesus sticks closer than a brother. Yeah. We've all heard that blood is thicker than water. It's a thing we say. It's just something we throw out there. It has meaning. And what we mean when we say it is that family is the closest relationship. That's what we're talking about. Like, if someone is going to do something with their friends instead of with their family, someone might say, "Hey, blood is thicker than water. You're supposed to be here." That's the idea. I looked into it though. The origin of this statement, they used to say the exact same thing, blood is thicker than water, but they meant something entirely different. It meant people that shed blood together, usually in battle, on the same team, same force, they are then bonded thicker than water, and they mean thicker than family. This is a real bond. You've all heard it said you can't choose your family, and that's true. And so this idea that you choose who you go to war with, and that bond is thicker than family. That's what it means. It used to mean the exact opposite of how we use it today, which I think is interesting. That's just how words work sometimes. But there's an older proverb than this one that says this: the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So that makes it a lot clearer. The water is the family, and it says the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Now they're talking probably about making blood oaths, which of course we don't do anymore. A few 6-year-olds might do it if one of them gets a pocket knife for his birthday, but that's it, right? You cut your hand or your thumb, and you smear the two cuts together so your blood intermingles. This is a bad idea, by the way, but this is a blood oath, and it's happened for centuries. It has meant important things in the past, and the idea that this is thicker, this is more important than your mother giving birth to you. This promise is bigger. That's what it meant. Blood is thicker than water. Now we clearly would see the blood covenant concept. We see that in Scripture. That God made a promise, made a covenant with Abraham. In fact, he shed a lamb in Genesis 15 and carried it over the fire to show that in order to prove to you that I'm going to keep my promise, a lamb will be sacrificed. And then that goes into the New Testament where we see the Lamb of God, Jesus Christ, shedding his blood for us. So the blood covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Our relationship with Jesus is supposed to come before our relationship with our own mom. My mom's not here today. I saw her yesterday. I didn't tell her that we were going to have this conversation today. Okay? Anyway, let's get to our sermon series. Remember, last week I spoke about short stories, very short stories, these parables from the gospel, and I was doing Matthew last week, and we talked about different short stories that Matthew told, that Jesus told, and they all lent themselves to the theme of starting well. We concluded that Jesus advises us to give ourselves the greatest opportunity for glory and success by starting whatever we do as well as we can. Start well to then move forward. So that's what we did last week. Today we're going to look at some short stories and even simply some metaphors that Mark uses in his gospel. And the theme is going to become apparent very quickly. The message of unity. That's what these stories all come together to tell us about unity. So let's start in Mark chapter 3, verses 31 through 35. It's not a parable. It's simply a metaphor that Jesus used. He said something is something else. Remember, that's a metaphor. Similarly, something is like this. But when metaphor, he says, this is this. Mark chapter 3, starting at verse 31. So Jesus is out preaching and teaching like he does. He's doing his Jesus stuff with the disciples, okay? And then in verse 31, Then his brothers and his mother came, and standing outside, they sent to him, calling him. And the multitude was sitting around. They're inside of a house, and his brothers and mothers are outside. They're calling to him. They said to him, "Look, your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you." But Jesus answered them, saying, "Who is my mother or my brother?" And he looked around in a circle at those who sat about him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and mother." Is. So, there we go. Jesus used the image of family. He says this is this thing, and we assume that that's authority. I mean, even, especially Jesus not married, if your mother calls for you, you go, right? That's how the rules work. And so they're saying, hey, your mom and your brothers are outside calling for you. And he says, this right here is my family. And he doesn't just say, you guys, my friends who are followers, but he says, whoever does the will of God. Instead of his actual blood family. Actual blood family, says these people. Remember, there is one closer than a brother from Proverbs. Jesus says the work of the kingdom makes us family. If we're doing this together, it makes us family. Isn't that what the will of God is for us? To do the work of the kingdom? God's will is for us to do the work of the kingdom. We're going to look at it later, but Mark chapter 16, the last thing Jesus says to the disciples is, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That is the will of God. He wants us to do that. And when we do that, we become the brothers and sisters of Jesus. When we go into battle together, we become the blood brothers. That is thicker than the womb of the mother. You got that, the water thing, right? That's what he says. You are my brothers and sisters. And let's go backwards from that family metaphor. Right before that, Jesus is talking in verses 22 through 27, same in Mark chapter 3. So he called them, all the people to himself, and said to them in parables. Well, let me tell you, before this, starting back at maybe 21. So the scribes, here we go, verse 22. And the scribes came down from Jerusalem, said, he, being Jesus, has Beelzebub. And by the ruler of the demons, he casts out demons. This guy's the devil. He's using the devil's power. That's what they're saying. Okay? Beelzebub is the devil. So Jesus says, how can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but has an end. There you go. Well, he says further, no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, and then he will plunder his house. A house divided cannot stand. The house, well, this is nice. The house is where the family lives, right? Your house, that's, even if you end up, if your parents or you're estranged from your parents, don't they? The house is where the family lives, and he says we have to share life as one. We can't fight against one another. We cannot speak against one another. If we do, we will fall. We will fail, and this house won't stand. That's what he said, isn't it? And it's great because there's a certainty here. They're calling him the devil. Okay? He's using the devil's power. And Jesus is shining perfect light on that. He says, I'm doing things that the devil likes. Am I? No. Am I furthering the message of hopelessness? Am I celebrating sin like the devil does? No. What I'm doing doesn't fit with the devil's game plan. Okay? He says, this doesn't work. The devil would never have me on his team. Not the way I'm playing. And so he points out that the fight between him and the devil, this is what is going on. I'm fighting the devil, and we are not on the same team. That doesn't make any sense. He goes further. Let's look at Mark chapter 8, verses 31 and 32. This is real good. Verses 31 and 32. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this word openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan. For you're not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." See, what he said, you are not mindful. You don't understand God's will. You don't understand God's will. You understand man's will. And the fact that you're fighting for man's will while I'm fighting for God's means you are against me. He calls him Satan. He doesn't call him the devil. I would like him to call him, that's lighter, isn't it? I'd rather be called the devil than actual Satan. The devil, there's some wiggle room. He says, Satan, you are the problem. I'm going to tell you, Peter's my favorite disciple, okay? By a long shot. He's probably my favorite Bible character after Jesus. And here Jesus says, you are Satan. Full hog. You are Satan. What's he doing? He's disagreeing with God's plan. He's standing in the way of what Jesus is supposed to do. And that is a house divided. That is a house divided. And Jesus knows his side. When he comes face to face with the other side, he recognizes it. That is the devil. And he calls it to him. Surely it breaks Peter's heart. Surely it does. But Jesus knows what's necessary. So that's heavy. It's serious. Jesus warns us about it elsewhere. In fact, in the same chapter, Mark chapter 8, verse 15. He says this while he's talking. Then he charged them, saying, "Take heed. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." That's it. That's the whole thing. Now, see, Mark is the shortest of the four Gospels. I don't know if you know that. I know that. I've told you it before. And I like it, not for that reason, specifically not because it's the shortest one to read. But everything that Mark chooses to write has got to have a meaning and a purpose to him. Clearly, he didn't add extra details just to fill the page. He wasn't worried about that. So leaven, of course, is what makes dough rise, right? That's yeast, the leaven. Have you ever seen the aftermath of a bread dough mistake? Dough everywhere, right? That's just, the leaven just goes. Because the leaven got out of control. The leaven was left unchecked and able to spread. We're going to have to, I don't remember I have a vague memory of my mom doing some bread dough in the refrigerator overnight, and in the morning, the refrigerator door had been pushed open by the dough. Okay? I also remember, I think that I have two memories. Another time that the entire kitchen counter, there was a bread pan underneath in the center, but all we could see was dough. My mom doesn't make bread anymore, now that I think about it. Just a couple of times, and that's enough. But here's the thing. Matthew has the same passage, the same message from Jesus, and he explains it more because Mark didn't want to waste words. But Matthew explains that Jesus told the disciples later what he meant. And he said it's the doctrine which leads to hypocrisy. That's what Jesus, the leaven is, I'm not talking about bread. I'm talking about the doctrine that leads to hypocrisy. And he says of the Pharisees and of Herod, okay? And so doctrine is the beliefs and the expectations of how we should act. That's our doctrine, right? That is every church, every person has a doctrine of some sort. And he says their belief system that leads them to do things. Well, here's the problem with it. He says if you follow it, eventually you're going to have to become a hypocrite. It leads to hypocrisy. Now, we know what a hypocrite is. It's someone who does different than what they say, right? That's a hypocrite. A hypocrite is a house divided, isn't it? One person divided amongst themselves. I'm saying this and I'm doing this. And it won't last. It never lasts. A hypocrite is not in unity with themselves, surely not in unity with their brothers and sisters, and not in unity with God. Jesus says, this won't work. So he says, beware the leaven, because that will make you a mess. It will break your house. It will break our house. It will break our family. It will fall apart. Don't do it. Beware. Staying on the baking theme, Jesus moves on to Mark chapter 9. Just one verse. Verse 50. He says, salt is good. But if the salt loses its flavor, how will you season it? He says, have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another. Salt. He's using it as a metaphor then. Again. Now, there are other passages that quote Jesus as he calls us the salt of the earth. I like what Mark said about us having salt in us. Does he mean in our makeup? Like part of your body should be salt? Or does he mean that we invite Jesus inside of us? I don't know, but either one works. There is salt in us. I'm not talking about crystals. I'm talking about what Jesus is saying, the thing that seasons and flavors life. It's in us, especially when we ask Jesus to be in us. So Jesus said, have salt in us, which he says clearly is to season those around us. And then he says, have peace with one another. That doesn't make sense with the salt part. He says this, have salt in you and have peace with one another. Two things. The idea of being salt is about sharing the gospel, right? It's loving on God's behalf, the people that we come in contact with, doing the work of the kingdom of God, doing God's will. That's what he's saying being salt is doing God's will, which is what Jesus said makes us family, right? Have salt means do God's will, means you're God's family. And then he says, and have peace among you. Be united. That's peace, right? When we're not united, we don't have peace. So the theme, they don't make sense if you look at them as one verse, but if you look at them in the core, in the whole gospel, it flows right in line. Yeah. Be the family. Do the work. Build the kingdom. Be united. Have peace. Now let's lighten up literally. Okay? Mark chapter 4, verses 21 through 23. Jesus also said to them, is a lamp brought to be put under a basket or under a bed? Is it not to be set on a lampstand? For there is nothing hidden which will not be revealed, nor has anything been kept secret, but that it should come to light. And he says, if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. He's talking about light. We must illuminate the darkness. That's what Jesus did so many times. So many times. We don't read about him, breaking into dark places very much. But he shone the light on the thoughts and attitudes of so many. He called people out for the reasons that they did and said the things that they did and said. He said, you're saying this. How many times do you say, you ask me that question because you think this? And what he's doing, he's taking a light off of where they're shining. He said, here's our problem. You are doing this because what you want to happen is this. Look at this, everybody. Here, let's shine some light over here. He shines light into the darkness. This is my secret. My secret is that I want this to happen. My secret is I want me to be this person. My secret is, and Jesus says, here's our problem right here. And he shines a light onto it. And he makes it clear every time that those beliefs, those plans, those ideas, they're not godly. In John's gospel, he calls himself the light of the world. He says, I am the light of the world. In Matthew's gospel, he says to us, you are the light of the world. And that is what he's talking about here in Mark. You are supposed to shine light in dark places. We're not supposed to sit quietly by and watch the world live in darkness. We must shine. It is the will of God. Do you get that? It is the will of God. He calls us that for a purpose. Now, when he says shine, he doesn't mean go yell at somebody because what they're doing is wrong. He doesn't do that. He means to shine with what they should be doing. Shine with what they could be doing right. The light of the world is supposed to be positive. I believe that. I mean, it's here to give us hope and a future. It's to give us life everlasting. It is positive. And so he says, shine your light. Think about warm sunlight in springtime, in the afternoon, on your face. That's the light that raises the flowers from the dirt. That's the light that causes the trees to give us fruit. That warm, pleasant sunlight. That light brings life. That light under a bowl or in a basket grows nothing. Oh, my house is so holy. So, oh man, we close the curtains because my neighbor has got a motorcycle and he's got tattoos and I don't want to see it. So I close the curtains and we just pray and we praise. My house is it's great. Now, we have 2 doors at the doorway because sometimes, delivery men come and we don't need that mess in our house. We just leave the package right there. That'll be fine and go on your way, darkness. I've got the light is here. He says, that's not what this is for. The basket doesn't go over the light. The light goes on a lampstand. The light reaches into dark places. The light must go in a positive, beautiful way. I keep a list in my office across from my desk, so when I look up, I see it. It's on the wall. It's a list of the 5 super bullets that'll kill any sermon, and there are 5 of them. Number 3 is too much content. So I want to close this sermon with some scripture that we've already talked about. It's the last thing that Jesus says in Mark. I'm going to read it to us. Mark chapter 16, that's the last chapter of Mark, verses 15 through 18. If you got a red letter Bible, you see these are all the words of Jesus. He said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will follow those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons. They will speak with new tongues. They will take up serpents, and if they drink anything deadly, it will by no means hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover." And then Jesus floats up into heaven. Doing miracles? That's what it says, right? Drinking poison, not dying, being invincible. I mean, that's what he said. That's Jesus' business, right? I mean, that is Jesus' business. If you had to describe what makes Jesus different than other people and you didn't get to talk about God, you would say, well, this dude turns water into wine. This dude brings the dead to life. This dude can do anything, walks on water. This stuff that he says at the end, that's Jesus' business. And what's amazing is this is Mark's version of the Great Commission. It is the sending, right? Is that what we said? Go, spread the gospel to every country, every creature, he even says. It is ascending, and yet more words are spent to explain the promise of provision. I want you to hear this. The first word is go. It's a sending thing. It's instructions. But more words are spent on the promise of provision. He is going to use more words to tell us how he's going to make it happen and what he's going to do alongside us and what he's going to do through us. He is making a commitment more than he is giving a commandment. But it still starts with go. Here's what I'm going to do in you. Remember, he said, have salt in you. He says, this is what I'm going to do in you. Miracles and life. You can have the same powerful blood that I have. It will be like we are brothers and sisters. Like we've got the same DNA. All you've got to do is do the will of God. Start with go. And that's where he started in the first place. Matt said, who are my brothers? The ones who do the will of God. We are family. And he concludes his whole message, the whole Gospel of Mark, his whole earthly story. He says, here's the last thing. You go and share the gospel, and let me tell you how awesome I'm going to make this deal for you. I'm going to fill you with life and power. I'm going to give you miraculous ability. I'm going to heal the sick through your hands. I'm going to raise the dead with your voice. And I'm going to protect your body from every affliction. And everything comes back to if we're family, if we're united, if we don't have a house that is divided, if we let peace reign, then this is what I will do. When bedtime comes at our house, we overcome all objections. As every parent knows, bedtime means objections, right? I object, Your Honor. No, Carl, it's bedtime. Overruled. But here's how we handle it. See, Carl needs a song. I didn't even start this. Lisa did. But at bedtime, she sings a song to him, and depending if he's laying on his back, she rubs his stomach. If he's laying on his stomach, she rubs his back. She sings a song. And so I do the same thing. I do what I'm told. So at bedtime, I sing a song. And we go through some of the same songs, but occasionally I'll throw in a new song. Anyway, so when Carl's like, I don't want to go to bed, and we just threaten to not sing a song. And he runs. Okay, so I want a song. Up the stairs he goes. It's pretty easy. It's pretty good. I know what you're all complaining about. Parenting is easy. But last night I've sung a song to him. I sang a song to him that I've sung just a few times. And it seemed like it was a song for this morning. And you all know it, so why don't you stand up and we'll just sing, okay? Jesus, 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 there's just something about that name. Master, Savior, Jesus, like the fragrance after the rain. Jesus, 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 let all heaven and earth proclaim the name. Kings and kingdoms will all pass away, but there's something about that name.